Hey,
Hello. You ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll. Are you?
Yes. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. This is the official pub date of the longest race, a day that has been many, many years in the making. We've got all of your questions and we will go through them. But maybe first, a good place to start is just Kara, tell us about from your side. I read about this in the intro of the book. How did this come about?
Um, well, this whole book came about because I had wanted to write a book. Adam and I had talked about writing a book together, but I just wanted to tell my story through my own voice. And so I talked to a few co-authors, and I think your forward in the book is so hilarious because I didn't know that you were going to say no until I read that.
Yeah. Well, I'd never
um,
done any book like that. I wasn't like a memoirist. I'm not a ghostwriter. Yeah. Sorry.
Right, right. And you said that you were like, well, I don't, I mean, how do you envision this? I've never written in the first person. And I'm like, and so when I read your forward, I was like literally laughing because I was like, I didn't even know all of that. But I had talked to a few other people, but when I talked to you, I was just like, she's the one. She gets it. She's from Eugene. She understands running. She understands the influence of Nike. And she's just um, gritty enough that she's gonna, I felt like maybe with a different co-author, we'd try to soften some of the things that I experienced, but I was like, she won't let me do that. So I was super happy when you said yes.
So was I. And to be honest, I also was like, oh, it might just be a news story. It might just be a magazine piece. And I love that you use the word gritty because one of the things that we talked about were like comps, which this is a big word in movie or TV pitching, or like what are the things out there that are similar? And now there are all these awesome books like Laura Fleischman's book, Des Linden's book, but there weren't a lot out there. And I feel like often, women in sports where we get kind of thrown into this self-helpy, inspirational, Lisa Frankish thing, and that's great. We need some of that. But yeah, your story was absolutely gritty from the get go. So our first question, we have one from Kristen in Arlington Heights, and I believe you could still add questions if you have more you'd like to add. We're going to try and get to all of them. So she says, Kristen, he or she, I'm not sure. Since I DNF, did not finish at the Chicago Marathon in 2018, I've put a lot of anxiety and fear on myself when it comes to training and running marathons. I think back to that day often. What advice do you have for runners who might also be experiencing this? And this person has signed up for the Chicago Marathon this year.
Well, I think that's great. You need to just get back out there. I think it's really normal to, after a performance or a race that you're not happy with, or that didn't go the way you wanted, or you got injured, or you had to drop out. It's hard sometimes to crawl your way back out of that because you've put so much time and energy into it. But also remember that everybody goes through that. And if you're having a hard time finding your motivation or getting back into it, maybe flip it. Try a totally different training plan to get into it. Maybe instead of long mileage, do more speed work. Maybe enter some shorter races. I think pushing and trying to find the motivation is really hard. So until you can really find that love and excitement again, don't be too hard on yourself. But I would say, change things up in your training, change things up the way you're looking at things. Maybe you do a shorter race in the meantime to just really excite yourself again of what you could do with running.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It's almost like you're making new memories. Like you're making new
Yeah.
memories to replace the bad one.
And remembering that
Another
it's
one.
okay. Like we all have really bad days or days that are hard to get over. Obviously, we talk a lot in the book about the 2009 Boston Marathon, but I dropped out. I didn't DNF'd in the Houston Marathon in 2019. And it was so disappointing. And it's okay to have those feelings. They're totally normal.
Amen. So we've got a question from Gustavo in Provo, Utah. Hi, Kara. I've been a fan of yours during your professional running career, and now you're my favorite announcer on track broadcasts. I can't wait to read your book. That's so nice. My question, have you ever fallen out of your fitness routine in regards to your workouts and nutrition? If so, what things did you do to get back in the habit of being consistent?
Yes, I fell out of my habits even as a professional athlete after a really big race, when I would take time off, and it always seems so hard. I remember like always the first workout back, you're like, I'm having a hard time hitting a pace for a quarter mile that I just ran a marathon in 4 weeks ago. You know, it's really hard. But I always remind myself like the fitness comes back. All the work you did for that race before is still in you. And to just have patience with yourself. Like it will come back. Just stay in the long game and don't compare yourself to who you were. Compare yourself to the progress you're making over time. I think it's totally natural to get out of shape, feel discouraged, but you'll be surprised at how quickly it comes back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how quickly it feels like it drops too. So Carol in Albuquerque asks, when you train on an elliptical, what do your workouts look like?
I haven't trained on elliptical for a while, but when I do, I can't just even when I'm on my treadmill, I have a hard time just doing the same thing indoors. So I always make up little workouts. And maybe it's 2 minutes hard, 3 minutes easy, or 1 minute hard, 4 minutes easy, but something where my brain has to stay engaged a little bit, but also I'm changing it up so I'm not just bored to tears. And so I like good music and I like just shaking it up. So seriously, like you could do 30 seconds as hard as you can and then 4 or 5 minutes. You could literally do anything, but I think little pickups help the workout go by faster and also just, I think, help you get in better shape too.
That also feels true on a treadmill too, not just even an
Yeah,
elliptical.
I do the majority of my running on a treadmill now, and every other day I do something. Maybe it's a half mile on, half mile off, or 0.10 on, point 0.5 off, but it just makes it go by so much faster and it feels like, oh, I got in a good workout instead of the drudgery of just watching. You know, we've all been there where you're just watching the minutes go by and you're like, don't look, don't look. It says 0.25. Don't look, don't look. And then you look back and it says 0.27. So we've all been there and it helps to change it up for sure.
And you're like, it must be broken. Time must
Yeah.
have stopped.
Yeah. What do you mean I only covered that much time? Come on.
Excellent. Next question is from Tom in Grandview Heights, Ohio. My girlfriend is the biggest Des fan, and I'm the biggest Kara fan. So we're loving your podcast, and we each bought a signed copy of your books for the other. Oh, that's really sweet. But with both of your books coming out, who is going to sell more copies? Let's hear a little trash talk. Do you two have a side bet about this?
You know, we do not have a side bet about this. I have been able to read her book and it's really good. And the way she has it laid out, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but it's really unique the way she has it laid out. And I feel like you get to know her on such a deeper level. So my thing is you just have to buy them both because they're both awesome books, but we have no side bet. I think we both want to do our books to do well because we're competitive women, but we have a lot of respect for each other. So we haven't actually had any smack talk about book sales.
Nice, nice. Um, okay, Bill in Richfield Springs, New York writes, Kara, I always wondered as a runner, when training for a race following a training schedule, I would get home from work and just not have it in me to run. I would just rest until I felt better. But as an elite, this might be different. What would you do in this case? Were you allowed to take a day or two, or were you forced to get out there and persevere?
I would say 99% of the time I just went out. But there are times in training cycles where you have to really listen to yourself. You know, it's one thing to be like, I'm tired. I've had a long day. I don't want to go do that. It's different to be like, I am tired in my soul, right? And so maybe you do need to rearrange the workouts or give yourself a really down week or take a couple days off. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier in my career. I did that at the end of my career when I was older. I think it would have saved me from a couple injuries and from maybe overtraining here and there. So the more you can listen to your body, the better. And I wish I had done it better when I was younger.
Speaking of younger, there's a question that came up on Facebook that I want to throw at you from Crystal Phelps. As a fellow running mom, my child just started cross country, and I'm so excited to share the love of the sport with her. I know your child also started running. How do you find the balance between being encouraging them, and pushing them? I'm excited to be on the sidelines, but I don't want to be that crazy mom.
Oh, Crystal, I feel you. Yeah, it's so crazy when your child does something that you love. You know, I love watching Colt race. I am totally like my grandfather. My papa would yell so loud and you know, I would tell him it was embarrassing, but I kind of liked it. And I'm the exact same way when he runs. But remember, it's his journey, right? Like you got to have your own journey through running. I got to have my very own journey through running. And so I'm constantly reminding myself that this is his journey, this is his experience, and he's so young, and they are young. And that's the thing about running is you can literally have this lifelong experience with it. So I get it. It's hard to sit on the sidelines and not like want to nitpick or coach or help, but really just encouragement and telling them how much it means to you to see them running, I think is the best policy.
And while we're on this subject, I really love talking to you about kind of your origin story in Duluth and Papa. And I know with a lot of the early readers of the book, he really stood out as a character. Can you just describe who he was and what that meant as your kind of first touch point in sports? Like that was the kind of your first coach in some ways.
Yeah, my grandpa was a lifelong runner. He wasn't a racer, which is I think important to point out because he he just ran because he loved the way it made him feel, which is how I am with it in my life at this point. But he just believed in me. That my little sister was a really good runner as well, and he'd hold the stopwatches and give us splits and give us tips, but he also was just like an advocate. Like he just believed in me, you know? And I remember this one time I grew up in northern Minnesota and the days are short and a lot of times the last event of the meet was the 4x4, but before that was the 3200. And a lot of times things would be running late and they put the boys and the girls together. So I would often race the boys in that last race of the meet. And I remember I was trying to pass a boy and he kept spitting on me whenever I tried to pass him. And my grandpa went and just freaking tore into him afterwards. So he was always like an advocate, supporter. He thought I could do anything. He didn't think I was any less because I was a woman or a girl, not a boy. And he also was just we were just kindred spirits. I remember when he was in his 80s, he ran on an Alter G and he called me to tell me about this thing. And I'm like, I know, Papa, I've been telling you about that for a few years. But he thought it was like so amazing. He felt, yeah, he'd be like, I felt like I was 70 again instead of, like the rest of us are like, I felt like I was 20 again. But he was just a huge person in my life. He really was the North Star for my mom and my sisters and I. And I just feel really grateful that I had him.
Yeah, I think it's just such a powerful example of something I've seen in a lot of sports where some kids do have parents who love the sport and really take on mentoring, but then there's also coaches, there's also grandparents, there's aunts, there's uncles. There's so many ways to encourage a kid in the sport, and really like make it kind of contagious, like just that love of competing in a really healthy way.
My grandpa watched every
Uh,
single race I ran, every single one until I went to college. And even then, he drove out to California once, and my grandma would be with him. But, he was the one that was like making her go. He drove out to California for a track meet. He drove to Iowa anytime I raced there. And so he didn't miss a single race until I moved away from 6 on. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, big fan, big fan. So this is a really interesting question. Kim in Burlington, Washington writes, did the team have a team psychologist or other mental health and wellness supports? If not, do teams have those resources today? Nutritionists, so much pressure, it should be mandatory.
So
Big can of
yeah,
worms.
I think the team you're probably referring to is the Oregon Project, and we did not have a nutritionist. Later in the project, there was a teammate of mine, and she wanted to work with a nutritionist. So she was worked with someone, but it wasn't with the whole team. That was her thing on the side, and the team paid for that, I believe, or the coaches paid for that. I believed from 2007 through 2011 that I was working with a licensed sports psychologist, and it turned out he was not a licensed sports psychologist. And actually, Mary, you were the one who figured out that his degree was in exercise physiology, which I didn't even know that. I thought he was a doctorate of psychology. And so anyway, I did work with someone, and I worked with a real true sports psychologist when I moved back to Boulder. And I think that working with people like that is really important because there is so much pressure and so much of running is a mental game, especially when you start talking about the marathon where you're going to be out there for so long. But any event, really, there's so much pressure and expectation. It can be really hard. But I would just say really research your people, because I was stunned to learn that a person I was confessing my deepest and darkest fears to was not a psychologist.
Yeah, that's actually a great example, I think, of how the book process kind of worked for us, where you would say something, you would describe an experience, what you remembered of it, often the emotional side of it. And then I would go back and look at my notes and be like, wait a minute, like that sounded weird. Like that's not typically, or, I would want to go check it out. And if anyone's interested, if you want to know if somebody is a psychologist, they have to be certified. There's a lot of training, there's a lot of education. My mother was a psychologist, so it's kind of lucky that I knew some of this, especially in the state of Oregon, which is where she was practicing. So you can find people's licenses and things publicly. And then obviously our fact checker went through that too. And I think that it's an important takeaway. Like you would think that Nike or some of these prestigious organizations or big companies would have. You can't assume people are going to do due diligence. And I've written so many stories over the years about a variety of topics where people's resumes, and we're seeing with George Santos, right? Like, so, it is important because, psychologists are working with the human mind. It's a very sensitive profession. And I think especially athletes, it's a high competition, high stress, vulnerable. You're dealing with like really high stakes for people too. So yeah, that definitely stood out to me as
And
well.
I think that if people read the book, they'll be shocked. This was supposedly the most, comprehensive elite team for track and field distance running in the world. And I didn't have a nutritionist. I didn't have any, every once in a while, Alberta would make me a skillet sensation to eat. Right. But I mean, like I didn't have anyone looking at what I was eating and telling me, yeah, that's good, or no, that's not, or you need more of this or whatever. So, it just wasn't all that it was presented to be.
Yeah. Another question, kind of back to the beginning. Shannon in Illinois asks, when did you start running? Was it a natural ability and attraction, or did you force yourself to begin liking it?
No, I loved it right away. I loved the freedom. My family, my mom was remarried for 10 years. And so I had 3 step siblings, and everyone had to be doing a sport at all times. And I'm actually glad that I grew up that way because I can watch sports and understand and like really appreciate how hard it is. But everything was hard to me. I mean, I was a fairly good soccer player and dancer, but mostly just because I didn't get tired and I could just keep going. And running was the first thing where I didn't have to think about how I was holding my racket right before I hit it, or I didn't have to think about where my poles were planting. I could just run. And I loved that feeling. And I had no idea that I was quote unquote good at it until years and years later.
Yeah, definitely. Next question, Liz in Texas. What made you want to come out with this book now? I love that question.
That's such a hard question. I think, Mary and I started this process when Alberta was first banned by USADA in 2019. And, I had already been thinking about it for a couple of years before that. But I felt I was also working through a lot of personal things that had happened to me and how did I feel about it all. I think it was important to you and I that it was all wrapped up by the time the book came out, that that USADA, he appealed that decision. So it went to WADA, and then that was finalized. And in the Safe Sport case, then he appealed that. So I felt like things needed to be wrapped up in my life for me to be able to heal and move on, and then be able to talk about it in the book. So I wasn't ready. If you had asked me 5 years ago to write a book, none of the really personal things would have been in there because I was still living with this sort of shield of what I had experienced. I wasn't able to talk about that stuff yet, not even with people I love. So
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I remember asking you really early on is, especially if you're delving into kind of trauma or really sensitive subjects, like what's your support system? And you had done a lot of work on this, and you had a really good, I think you were in a really good place in terms of your ability to talk about it, and a little bit of distance from it. And I think one of the things that was really powerful for me about just seeing how it evolved too is like the community you had with other women and runners. Like, and I think that when we originally talked about this, there was also some urgency of like, this isn't going to change. I'm in a unique position, and people will like, I, so there was kind of this arc of you understanding your place in the sport differently that I don't know if that we even really articulated that in the book, but I thought it was really empowering. And that's why we used the Adrienne Rich quote in the beginning, that when a woman tells her truth, I'm paraphrasing, but it opens it up. And we're already seeing that just in a few hours the book has been out. And that to me is like where a lot of great story lives, when somebody sees that their memoir isn't just about them. Does that make sense?
totally. And I remember talking to you because I knew that friends of mine, Allison Desir and Lauren Fleshman, had signed book deals. And I remember saying to you, no one's going to care about this book. Like there's two. And then I found out Des was writing a book. I was like, there's too many women's running books. Who's going to read this? And you were like, excuse me. Nobody would say that about baseball. No one would say there's too many baseball memoirs coming out at once. And it really hit me that there's space for these stories and people do want to hear them. So that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And sports journalism is 85% men. And I love to run too. I'm not making an Olympic team anytime soon, but I just feel like anytime I'm on the trail, I'm like, that's a reader, that's a reader, that's a reader. Like there's a huge audience. So Sean in Michigan asks, is there anything in this book that you were nervous to put on paper and make public?
Yes, a lot of things. I think a little bit about my childhood. I talk about my stepdad who did the best that he could. But it wasn't a perfect relationship. I was definitely nervous to talk about the way, obviously, the instance of assault with Alberto and I, but even about the way he talked to me because I felt a lot of shame that I had allowed that to happen. So, and also the way that I uh, didn't stick up for Amy Begley because I just felt people will see me as like an asshole. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but there was a lot of things, there's a lot of things that I've shared. I like to share with people. I like to get deep with people, but I still had a shield of certain things. And I think it's because I had a lot of shame around that. And I finally got into a place where the shame holds me back. I don't want to feel shameful anymore. I want to release it. But it was a process for me to get to that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we talked about too is David Carr's memoir and The Night of the Gun, which is a masterpiece. And Carr was a friend and colleague of mine at the Times. And what I love about that memoir is it's exactly what you're describing. Is it isn't just the facts of what happened, but how your relationship to them changes over time. And I thought like I wasn't sure like early on. I was like, if you're willing to own everything, like mistakes, good, bad, and ugly, we can have a book, but you can't you're getting under a microscope. And I think you had no illusions about what the story was and doing a lot of really deep reflecting. And I just think that's unusual. I think it makes for great stories. And I applaud that because it's a lot. It's a big lift.
Yeah, but you kind of set that tone early on. You were like, we're either going to do this and you're going to share everything or like good for you, but I'm probably going to like do something else. And that challenged me, but that's what I wanted. I just needed someone who believed it was worth telling and made
Definitely.
me feel like I wasn't going to lose who I was by sharing. I think that's a big thing that I was worried about and have been worried about sharing this is that I don't want to be seen as someone who is damaged by another human being. I don't want that to be the definition of my life or what people think of when they see me. Like I could start crying. I don't want that. I'm happy. I'm fulfilled. I live the life I want to live. And I didn't want the way people looked at me to change. I didn't want sympathy or, oh, poor her or whatever. And so I think that was a lot of my fear as well, is I didn't want people to look at me differently. I didn't want to have like a scar for the rest of my life when people looked at me.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And also just like literally owning your story. That's why I do what I do is stories matter. Stories matter. And I think your story matters.
Thank you.
Um, Hannah, New York, what was your first marathon and what was it like?
My first marathon was the New York City Marathon in 2008. And I remember I loved training for it so much that the night before, I felt really sad because I felt like, oh, it's going to be over. Everything, this time I've had, the commitment of my team at the time to me, I was the only one running the marathon. And I felt so sad. And then it was like crazy because obviously you can just run another one. But I loved it. I loved everything about it until about 4 miles to go. And, I started cramping like a lot of us do. It kind of went up through my calves, into my hamstrings, into my back. And so when I finished, I told my husband, I'm never going to do that again. But as we all know, the amnesia wears off quickly. And that night I was already thinking, well, I mean, I only had 8 weeks to prepare for this. Not everything went perfectly out there today. Like what could happen if I really nailed it or I trained more? And so I loved it. I mean, I remember running thinking like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but it was really, really hard. And, Yeah, it wasn't easy, just to be clear. It was really, really hard, but it was totally worth it.
I remember working on that sequence of the book with you and just being blown away. Like most people's first marathon, you kind of do it in private. You just kind of feel it out. And I was like, oh, you're on TV. And
Yeah.
you were hot off Beijing. Like great expectations. Like that is stressful.
I think in a weird way it worked because I can over obsess over stuff. And so it was like 8 weeks from my final race at the Olympics to this marathon. And there just wasn't enough time to overtrain or overthink it. It was like, we know you have speed. I did 5 weeks at 100 miles, which at the time was the most I'd ever run. And we just kind of focused on building up my long runs. And it was just like, now go. And I think that was actually good. Like looking back, the next race I ran was Boston. I think we overdid it. I think I overdid it for the Olympic marathon in 2012. It's kind of funny looking back now. I'm like, wow, the lack of time that we had actually worked in my favor because as a marathoner, it's very easy to overtrain, to think I just need one more workout, I need one more long run, and I just didn't have time for that.
Yeah. And the mental piece of that too, right? Am I prepared? Am I not?
Yeah.
Whole other part of the equation. Great. So the next question is Lindsay in Maryland asks, any tips for new runners?
Yeah. Look, just get out there. It doesn't matter. People will say to me, well, I'm not like a real runner, but twice a week they go out and run. I'm like, that's 100% what a real runner is. So I think baby steps, don't try to do anything too big. Just take it as it comes. I think sometimes when people are starting running, the first week is fun and then the second week they're sore and by the third week they're overwhelmed. So it just baby steps, maybe just running a couple times a week and walking and just building up your strength, but it is so worth it. And if you need help, most local running stores have training groups or they have support meetups and you can meet people that will kind of hold you accountable and meet you and run with you, but you don't have to go out and run a marathon to be a runner. It can be a mile, and that's amazing. And so you don't have to do these big, long runs to be a runner.
Absolutely. So James in North Carolina asks, any advice to collegiate runners wanting to compete at the highest level? We read a lot about your time in Boulder and kind of that jump. So I think it's a great question.
Yeah, it's a tough jump, right? From collegiate to professional. All of a sudden, you don't have the distractions of school, which you think are going to be great, but then you have like your whole day just to train. I think just like with college, you have to look long term and take your time getting into it. It's just a different game. Don't ever lose your love of it because once you do it as a job, it gets so much harder. And I went through periods of my career where it was a job and it wasn't fun. But remembering why you got into it in the first place, being grateful for opportunity, but also remembering this is a sport you can develop in over time and you don't have to knock it out of the park the very first couple of years as a professional. Look, I signed my first professional contract in 2001. I didn't make the Olympic team till 2008. And so it's okay if it takes time. If you're still enjoying it and you're still loving it, keep going.
Yeah, it's a great point. Linda asks in the chat, and you feel free to add questions. What's your favorite marathon and why?
Okay, so people always ask me this, and I only have one child, but I'm always like, I assume this is like asking if you have a favorite child. Like, I have 4 pets, right? I have 2 cats and 2 dogs. And if you ask me who's my favorite, I'm like, I can't say it because I feel bad. But I love New York because it was my first marathon, and uh, it really made me realize I was stronger than I thought. But I just loved the history of the Boston Marathon so much to the point where if you read in the book, it was borderline like not healthy obsession with it. But I loved it so much and I love the history behind it and the culture behind it and the way the city knows about it and supports it. And I'm trying to remember any other marathons I've run. I mean, I don't know. Those are my 2 favorites by far.
Yeah, great choices. Speaking of running, since we're on kind of the dorky part of the nuances of the sport, what are Grace in California asks, what's your pre-run and post-run? What are your pre-run and post-run rituals? What type of music do you listen to?
Okay. For years, people ask me about music, and I just have to say, I'm not that deep. I really love 80s, that's like happy, or even 90s. And then if I'm listening to anything that was made after 2000, then it's going to be top 40s. I just like simple, happy music. I don't want to think. I just want to be pumped up. Literally, 80s. I work out with someone. He's like, what should we listen to? And I'm like, 80s. And he's like, 80s. And then I had like the best workout and I'm singing along. So I just like super easy breezy, puts me in the right headspace music. I'm not that deep when it comes to music. It's always disappointing. We talked about Des earlier. She is very deep on music. And I'm like, I've never heard about that song. So anyway, and then as far as like pre and post, I like to hydrate well, snack. I don't know how in college I used to run an empty stomach in the morning. I can't do that anymore. I haven't done that for years and years and years. And then I think the important thing is the post run. If you are doing a hard workout, you need to make sure you're hydrating and getting in carbs and getting in protein afterwards. My life changed when I discovered a protein shake. It was like, wow, the day after a super hard workout, I'd be like, I feel tired, but I don't feel wrecked, right? Like there's a difference. And so there is science behind the refueling after a workout. And the sooner you learn that, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Advice. So this is, would you give young female runners?
Okay, that's pretty broad.
Um,
I think I would say, look, running is the greatest gift I was ever given. And I wish if I could talk to my high school self, I'd say, stop worrying about not improving every time you go out there. You're going to be able to do this for so long. It's going to be there for you for so long. So I think embracing it as a lifelong journey, and then remembering that everybody's journey looks different. When I went to college, there was girls I had run against in high school that were running so well and like winning national titles or getting top 3 at the national championships, where I was getting 170th, right? And I just felt like so jealous and so like, how are they doing it and I'm not doing it? So I think really thinking patiently and focusing on your own story and your own success, and acknowledging the progress that you're making. It's easy to get caught up in the comparison trap, but if you really stay focused on yourself, I feel like you enjoy the whole process and the whole journey so much more.
Indeed. And Alex in the chat just asked, just curious, how many days a week would you do more than one run a day? And how many rest days do you take? I'm not sure if that's when you were really ramping up for a race or today, or how you want to break that down, but
Okay. Well,
go for it.
today I try to run 6 days a week, depending on how my body is. If I'm having a really good week, I'll run 7 days. But I'm here. I last week I ran 40 miles. As a professional, I would run up to 135 miles per week. I pretty much doubled every day, but Saturday when I ran for Alberto, I doubled pretty much every day, but it would normally be like cross training or Ultra G running. When I ran for Jerry Schumacher, I doubled every day but Saturday. No. Sorry. I doubled every day but Sunday, which would be my long run day. And then when I moved back to Colorado and I was with Mark Wetmore, I doubled every day but Saturday, the day before my long run. I doubled on long run days, which took some getting used to, but it definitely made me feel better on Monday and certainly by Tuesday. So I was always a front loader, if you guys know what that means, like a heavy morning, easy night. I never wanted to have to run more than 4 or 5 miles max at night. So I would always put my bigger workout where I had to focus more and use more energy and mental energy in the morning.
Excellent. Kind of related to that, Cami and Saginaw, shout out. Any advice on how to adjust expectations about pace or distance as our bodies age and change?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question because I feel like everyone just says age is nothing but a number. And it's like, no, there's actual human physiology. We age, we do crest a peak. And so it's getting comfortable with your body. I fought this for so long. I was so unhappy trying to prove that I could still be an elite athlete. And it wasn't until I turned 40, which I was fearing, by the way, because I remembered when my mom turned 40. But I woke up with this sense of like calm and just thinking, wow, I'm 40 years old. My body can't do what a 27-year-old body or a 32-year-old body does. And so I think if you really love the sport, you can reframe your goals. I remember when I was training for the Houston Marathon, I was saying, my goal is to run, and everyone would go, oh, give me a break. You're going to try to run 2:27. And I was like, no, this is the body I have now, and this is different. And so I think we've gotten away from it just being okay to age. Like all the stories about how you don't age, or look at this person running so well in their late 30s or 40s, and good for them. But the majority of us are going to age and we're going to slow down, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that pursuing your own goals still aren't worthwhile.
Absolutely. And that's what's so interesting to me about running too is like, and your career very much follows this, where you go from the mile to the 5K to the 10K to the marathon. Like your body becomes better suited for different events. And
Totally.
I think that's one of the things I really like about the pro side of the sport as well.
Yeah, I couldn't have run a
Um,
marathon in my 20s, right? I would have gotten injured right away, but like the hardening of my body over time and all again, that's what I would say to young athletes too. All of that work every year that you're healthy and training, it's like just building the blocks and the foundation, and you're able to draw on that throughout your entire career.
Excellent. Stephen asks, do you do any strength training? And if you do you use heavy or light weights?
I've always done strength training. I've always loved being in the gym. I definitely was a lightweighter for most of my life. Now that I'm not a competitive athlete anymore, like heavier weights now. But I'm not the person that's just going to max out all the time, but I do like a challenge. I do like to see progress. I think strength training is super important for runners. I think we get afraid we're going to bulk up. And I don't want to be heavy or whatever, but that's not what happens. You just get stronger. And so if you're a marathoner, the point is, as the race goes on and you start to fatigue, the stronger you are, the more work you've done in the gym, the more your form holds up and the less you fall apart towards the end. And so I think it's really important. You don't have to do it every day. When I was a professional, I did it twice a week, probably. Right now I do it twice a week. But I encourage everyone to hit the gym. I think it's fun and it just helps your body get stronger in different ways.
Absolutely. Jenny in Sussex, Wisconsin asks, oh, this is a doozy. Get ready. What is your
Oh God.
favorite race moment of your life?
Oh God. Probably making the 2012 Olympic team. Just because I had been so injured. It's okay, my dogs were barking
It's my
earlier.
dog.
Um, just because I had left the team, I had left the Oregon Project, I had a femoral stress fracture. I'm usually really motivated to cross train, and I was very depressed. I had not been cross training. 12 weeks to the day from the Olympic trials was my first run with Shalane. She was doing a 20-mile run and I made it 8 miles. And so the whole buildup was very stressful. My coach at the time, Jerry Schumacher, was like, "You're not going to make it." I mean, he wasn't being mean. He was just being honest. And 2 days before he said, I think you're going to make it. And that changed like the way I was looking at everything. But I think leaving Alberto, dealing with everything I was dealing with, overcoming this really bad injury, not having a good training block at all, I just was so relieved and so happy and so grateful to make that team. It probably means more to me than any other race.
Yeah, it's a really powerful sequence of the book too, because I think the first time you athletically came on my radar was when I was covering 2012. And I remember when you made the team, it was like, oh, that's great. But I had no idea what the backstory was. No one did really. All I knew was like,
Yeah.
oh, like she switched coaching before the trials. That's like kind of unusual. And so to find out all that was going on behind the scenes, to me, it was this reminder of like, you can follow a sport, you can watch things on TV, you can cover a sport for the New York Times, and you still do not know the whole story at all. So on the injury front, Dermot in Belmore, New York asks, oh, this is very nice. He says, hope the family is well. Since your diagnosis of dystonia in 2022, have you felt or made much progress towards reclaiming yourself? Has it been more medical, pharma induced, or physical means of handling these neuro hiccups? Refrain from chance of escalating to fall risk.
It's been both pharma and my own work. A year ago, well, a year ago last month, I was told I had to stop running. And like I said earlier, I ran 40 miles last week. So I have been slowly trying different things because if I just throw everything at me that could possibly help with dystonia, I won't know what helped. Botox has definitely helped me. I would like to get to a place where I don't have to use it, but right now it is helping me. It makes me feel better. It makes me happy. I'm able to get out and do some running. I was on a Parkinson's medication and I was taking it multiple times a day. I'm still taking it, but only before I exercise. And it was actually scary to come off that medicine because that medicine was what gave me the most obvious stability. But I was having jumbled thoughts. Like I would be talking to the boys and I couldn't say the word I wanted to say. And so I don't know. I was just saying the wrong word. And they were like, you mean this? You mean that? So finally I talked to my neurologist and she said, I think it might be the medicine. I was like, well, so I started backing off on that. But I've also been training with the trainer to make my body stronger. I just started doing PT with a neurological based PT. And I have also been talking to a doctor in California about trying some brain stimulation stuff. So the journey is, I feel like the journey with dystonia has really just started. And I'm hoping that in 4 years' time, I won't have to take medications and I'll be in a better place. But right now, I'm just working through what works for me and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that also your career, including this chapter of it, is a testament to just how much we're learning about performance and sports. And, athletes are often at the cutting edge of whatever that research is too. And you really took on the research of this too. I feel like you have like a medical degree. There are moments when I would
Well,
talk to you about things, someone could be like, "Oh, this," and I'd be like, "You know so much about this stuff."
well, you know what's interesting is dystonia is so under researched. And so when I admitted to everyone that I was diagnosed with this rare neurological movement disorder, I kind of got a lot of people reaching out to me, which was very overwhelming. But I feel like I've been lucky because people want to see if they can help me and maybe it'll help other people in the future too. So, yeah, I have like a fake PhD in neurological movement disorders at this point.
Excellent, and all can be found in the book, which you can order copies of as of today. Speaking of, Dr. Kara, Marilyn asks, I can never say this, so bear with me. Did you ever suffer from plantar fasciitis? It's like you
Plantar
know what she's saying.
fasciitis.
Thank you,
Yes.
fasciitis.
Yes.
And how did you deal with
Actually,
it?
okay, so actually I had horrible plantar fasciitis in 2007 and I was the fittest I was in my life and my foot hurt all the time, my left heel specifically, and it would kind of warm up and I would get through the workout and then I would, you guys have all had it. Then you're kind of like limping around and you're sleeping with your toe sock and all this stupid stuff. And honestly, I I was seeing someone at the time, Justin Whitaker, who I think still does ART, and he like came to the world championships and worked on my foot like literally right before I went out to race in '07. But this is a thing that nobody wants to hear is that I had to just take time off after that world championships for it to finally heal. I mean, I raced a few races and I raced Paula in the half marathon. But I took a cortisone shot in my heel and then I just had to take 3 weeks to do anything. And when I started back, it was gone. I had been pushing through it for so long. As runners, sometimes we are just like, oh, what else do I need to do? But sometimes have to calm down the inflammation and rest.
Right, which is everything you like don't want to do. Um, great. So last call for questions if folks want to drop any
Yeah,
last
yeah.
ones
No, everybody
in.
ice it, tennis ball roll. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a delay on my end. So Sarah in Woodbury, Minnesota, fellow Minnesotan. Hi, Kara, fellow Minnesotan, former Duluth resident here. I was curious if you and your husband are trying to stay out of your son's running as he begins the sport, or if you're trying to coach him a bit with your vast experience. Thank you, and I cannot wait to get the book.
At this point, I'm trying to stay out of it. I'm trying to just be the driver of the carpool car to practice and just cheer. But I do think if he pursues it, at the high school level, it would be really hard for me to not go to that coach and ask if I could volunteer assist or volunteer help out. And that's where I'm at right now. Boulder High School coaches, if he decides to pursue it in high school, not that I would try to change your training, but I just, yes, I'm trying to be cool and step away. But if he really wants to pursue it at a deeper level, then I do want to be involved.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Kara, was there anything else, like questions that you wish were asked or wanted to address, or now that we've shaken loose all sorts of stuff in your brain?
Not really. I see some of these questions on the right. Do we want to go through a couple of these?
Yeah, we've been going through them, kind of off and on. A lot of I love how many are like so focused on running. Can you, Kara, help me run a sub 2:30? Oh, this is a fun one. We'll end on this one. Will we see you at the grandma's this year?
I will be at Grandma's Marathon this year. We are going to try to do something new. The broadcast has been online and on the radio. We're going to actually try to do a television broadcast this year, and I will be part of the team along with Carrie Tolson and Chad Samala. And so I will definitely be at Grandma's Marathon. Yes.
Since you mentioned Carrie's name, I thought it was so fun to learn about like you guys racing against each other's kids. Could you just talk a bit about that back and forth and like the evolution of that friendship? Because I think it's such a great story.
Yeah, Carrie Tolson is so amazing. I heard from her today as always, and she didn't even know I was sending her a book, and she was already listening it on the audio version, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, she got the book in the mail." Carrie Tolson was a year older than me, and she is the greatest high school athlete ever from Minnesota, runner, but potentially even athlete. She won 5 state cross country meets, which is still a record. And she is from a really small town. And so her town and a couple other towns would pool together to make a team. And so back in the day, it was either double A, you had 500 or more kids in your school, or you were single A, you had 499 or less. And so she was always bouncing between the two classes. So when Carrie was in single A, I was state champion. And when Carrie was in double A, I got second or third. And the thing about Carrie is she was always so gracious. She helped me out the first time I went to Foot Locker Nationals as a high school athlete. I was so overwhelmed. She helped me out, made sure I got everywhere. Um, she's just been an awesome person in my life from the beginning. And she went to Villanova where she won quite a few NCAA titles. So even when I was in college, she was still having this amazing success. And then she made the Olympic team in 2004. So it's just been so fun to see her be successful. And she also works in broadcasting, but she has always been kind to me. Not everybody in my life has always been kind to me. She always has been, and I'm a huge fan.
I think one of the big themes of the book is like sisterhood, in your case, literal, right? But also just the way that like a lot of these bonds and friendships form in the sport, which is really cool. And I think, everybody just gets faster. We're seeing that in women's distance running right now, right? Like everyone gets better. And I thought that was like a really cool thread throughout the various stages of your career.
Yeah, I think when I was coming up, it was like, oh, there's one star. Dina Castor was the star for so long. But I think at this point, we've completely flipped that where there are dozens of American distance stars. And I think a lot of them have gotten to that next threshold by embracing other women and training together. And it's been really cool to see that evolution. And, I feel grateful that when I was running well, it wasn't just me. It was me and Shalane and Des and Molly Huddle, and everyone was inspiring each other to take another step forward. And so I really love where American distance running's gone, especially on the women's side, because I just think the depth is amazing. And then there's not so much pressure on just one person to always feel like they have to perform. And we've just learned that one person's stardom doesn't diminish your star, right? We can all be stars. It's been really cool to see.
Yeah, and on that note, we'll wrap it up. Thanks to Premiere. Don't forget to get your signed copy of the book. Thanks to Kara, of course, and thanks to everybody for these wonderful questions. It was such a pleasure.
Yes, thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it.
All right, bye guys.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you